Hello and welcome to my channel. Casper here. In today's video, we're going to be looking at one amazing game that was played between Stefan Levitsky and Frank James Marshall. Now, just for disclosure, this is not gonna be like one of those boring videos where people just show you the moves that were played in the game, but I'm going to make this video interesting by explaining the ideas behind the moves to make you learn the opening that Frank James Marshall played in this game. Frank James Marshall was a brilliant attacking player and the United States chess champion from 1909 to somewhere around 1936, while his opponent Stefan Levitsky was a Russian chess grandmaster and chess champion who actually took third place in Moscow in the year 1899. So not a weak player at all. So White started with pawn to d4, then Marshall responded with pawn to e6. This is called the Howitz defense, and the main purpose of this move is to transpose to mainline openings without immediately showing your opponent your cards. On the next move, you can go knight f6 or pawn to f5, or maybe playing the stonewall defense, the semi-Slav, the QGD. You just want to keep your opponent guessing right in the opening stage. So e4, and now you can see that the game has now transposed into the French defense. That's one of the advantages of playing pawn to e6 on move 1 against d4. It's like White started with pawn to e4 and then Black responded with e6. Pawn to d4, which is the position that we are looking at in the Marshall game. So Marshall here played pawn to d5 immediately, and his opponent played knight c3. I like playing this move. This is called the Boston variation of the French defense. Nowadays, bishop b4 is the popular move here after knight c3. If you are playing White, sometimes you will see your opponent taking on e4 where you take back with your knight, but Marshall here played pawn to c5. And now the opening has transposed into the Sicilian defense, Marshall Gambit. So you can see that the game started as a normal Howitz defense with pawn to e6, then transposed into the French defense after White played pawn to e4, and finally transposed into the Sicilian defense, which is what you're seeing right now, Marshall Gambit. This is exactly how strong players play chess. They have a tendency of combining openings in one game in order to confuse their opponents, to keep their opponents guessing. If you don't understand what I'm talking about here, it's like White started with pawn to e4, and then Black responded with c5, the Sicilian defense. Then after knight c3, which is the closed Sicilian, then Black goes pawn to e6, d4, and d5, which is the position that we are looking at in the Marshall game. Okay, so back to this position. In the game that we are analyzing, knight to f3 is what was played, but let's just see what would have happened if White took on d5 with his e-pawn. Well, the main line here is to take back on d5 with the e-pawn, d takes c5, bishop takes c5, and after queen takes d5, you don't trade queens immediately. You first of all go queen e7 check, and after queen e4, the main move again, you go bishop f5, indirectly eyeballing the undefended pawn on c2. After queen takes check, you go knight takes e7. Bishop d3, you take the bishop and force White to have an isolated pawn on d3. What Black is saying here is that I'm gonna develop my queen's knight in castle long, start attacking this pawn, and maybe later on play knight f5. So this is just one possible continuation. But if, let's say, White took on c5 with his d-pawn instead of e takes d5, here is how the game would have continued. D takes c5. I'm sure Marshall would have played pawn to d4, harassing this knight. And after knight b5, double attacking Marshall's pawn, maybe Marshall was going to play s6 first. And after knight takes d4, he would have taken the pawn on c5, then bishop e3, queen b6. There's even a nasty trap here where White plays pawn to b3, and then you go bishop b4 check, forcing White to play king e2. Because if bishop d2, for example, the knight on d4 falls. So this is how the game would have continued if Marshall's opponent took one of these pawns. But being a strong GM as well, Levitsky played knight f3, just developing his king's knight. Then Marshall played knight c6, a typical developing move in the French defense, and the Sicilian. E takes d5, e takes d5, bishop e2 by White, preparing to castle short, knight f6, all normal developing moves. Castle short, bishop e7, preparing to castle short, bishop g5, developing the last minor piece, castle short, and finally d takes c5. Now the trades have started and White is up a pawn. What should Marshall do? Well, he just played bishop e6, ignoring to capture the pawn on c5, and instead he chose to defend his center pawn on e5 because that's what is important in chess. Knight d4 anyways, and this is when Marshall took on c5, and now they have equal number of pawns. Knight takes e6, then Marshall just took with his f pawn, and you can clearly see how these pawns are defending each other. Bishop g4 by white. Hey, be very careful. You can't take the bishop because white's dark squared bishop is gonna take on d8, which is why Marshall here played queen d6, defending his pawn on e6, which was being attacked by the light squared bishop. Bishop h3, more like a prophylactic move, I guess. Marshall here played rook a e8, defending the e6 pawn twice. Queen d2, white finally connects his rooks, and bishop b4 was played. Always remember to take advantage of pins if you can. e4 is also coming. So bishop takes f6 is what was played. Then Marshall took back with a rook. Rook a d1. Marshall knew that this rook is indirectly attacking the queen on d6. That's why he played queen c5, putting his queen on a better square. And e4 might still come. Queen e2 was played by white, then Marshall took on c3 just to mess up his opponent's pawn structure. That's what you're supposed to do given a chance. At this point, I would like to mention that nobody was playing by memorization. They were just playing chess. The trap was not even in Marshall's mind at this point. He was just playing normal chess. Queen takes c3, and black's pawns are well connected. When you play chess by the rules and principles, chess starts playing itself so well. And now this is where chaos began on the board. First of all, white took the pawn on d5. I guess that's what everybody can do, because this pawn is pinned to the undefended rook on e8. E.g., if e takes d5, this queen takes e8. And this is where Marshall started uncorking some evil moves that left the spectators in great shock. First of all, he played knight d4, attacking the queen. White played queen h5, attacking the undefended rook on e8. Marshall saw that, and that's why he played rook ef8. And there was a trick here. You can see this is a strong battery by black. This is how you're supposed to be playing chess whenever given a chance. For example, if rook c5 attacking the queen on c3, Marshall would have played rook takes f2, intending to checkmate on f1. E.g., if rook takes f2, there was queen e1 check and the game was going to mate in 1. That's why the players didn't take that route. Instead, after queen h5 and rook ef8, white played rook e5 instead of rook c5, simply controlling the e1 square. But again, the computer likes rook f2 because white doesn't have to take the rook. The correct move should be rook e1. If rook takes f2, again there's a mate coming after this continuation. But anyways, so that was just for the computer, which is not what Marshall played here. Marshall played another surprising move, rook h6, simply attacking the white queen. And his opponent here played queen g5. Now watch. Rook takes h3. What a cold-blooded move by Marshall. Simply sacrificing his rook because he understood that if g takes h3, he was going to play knight f3 check, which is a triple fork that was going to win the queen on g5. That's why his opponent didn't take on h3. Instead, he played rook c5, attacking the queen on c3, and lo, here comes a golden move which made the spectators to go like, wow, queen g3. And with this move, white resigned. Ladies and gentlemen, after the end of this game, the spectators started throwing gold coins at James Marshall, or probably on the board, and it was from here where this game was nicknamed the gold coin game. Oh, you may ask, what if black took on g3 with his h-pawn? Well, this was going to be checkmate in 1 after knight e2 check because the rook is covering the h1 square. And let's say if white took with his f-pawn instead of his h-pawn, there was going to be a mate in 2 here after knight e2 check, forcing white's king to go to h1 and rook takes f1 checkmate. So we can clearly see that neither h takes g3 or f takes g3 was going to work in this position. And if queen takes g3 was played, Marshall would have played knight e2 check, and after king h1 the only move, here comes knight takes g3 check. The h-pawn is pinned to the king, so it can't take. If f takes g3, there comes a mate once again. So this is the reason why Marshall's opponent resigned in this position after queen g3. So this is the end of our video. If at all you guys enjoyed this short presentation, please consider giving this video a thumbs up and do subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, so that I can be encouraged to keep on making more wonderful videos just like this one and just for you guys. Alright, thank you so much and see you in the next video.